Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Branded Podcast. We have a really great guest this week, Mahbod Moghadam, who was the previous co-founder of Genius, an incredible website whose mission is to annotate the world, and also currently the co-founder of Everpedia, the world's largest encyclopedia. This conversation is incredibly interesting. Mahbod gives a fresh perspective on what brands in the 21st century are like, what they should be, what's wrong with them, what's great about them, what brands of, we touched upon brands of the past. And it's a really great conversation. I think you'll definitely like it a lot. We get into the weeds a bit, and Mahbod also is a very candid person, so you will not be entertained. So with that said, please enjoy the show, and don't forget to share the episode if you liked it. So thank you, and again, enjoy the show. Mahbod, welcome to the show.
Yo.
So just a little bit of background about the show as it is pretty much we're asking the question, or I'm asking the question, what is a iconic brand in the 21st century? With the world changing so much, both culturally as well as technologically, what does it mean to be a great brand in this day and age and moving forward? And we do that from three perspectives. So the first perspective is the actor, quote unquote, which are people who are actually building brands in this environment. So that's you and others. And then from the perspective of the agency, which are people who are kind of trying to help build brands. And then from the perspective of the artist, those that have a really great and full, complete lens on society.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the overarching idea. So my first question to you is, what does it mean to be an iconic brand in the 21st century?
Yeah, it's a crazy question, man. Like, on the one hand, you have really, really old brands that are iconic in a way that it seems like no new brand could ever come up to. Like, for example, Nike. There's nothing high tech or very sophisticated about Nike, but there's just something about the swoosh. It's my favorite brand. It's the favorite brand, I'm sure, of a lot of people. But then you have this big movement going on right now of software, sophisticated, a lot of times direct-to-consumer companies building these new brands that are making other older brands look stale. For example, Casper mattress versus Sealy. At one point, you could argue that Sealy was the Nike of mattresses, but it didn't really have the cult following, obviously, that Nike does, which is, it seems like, why it was easy for Casper to swoop in. And now there's a lot of young people who, they would never think Sealy is cool. They wouldn't have, even if Casper didn't exist. But they do think Casper is cool. They're like kind of proud that they ordered their mattress from an app. So it's a strange thing going on. I guess what it seems like is happening is, if you're an old brand, you're in trouble unless you've succeeded in building a cult status around your brand.
And do you think that these new firms coming up, like you mentioned Casper and other software companies, what great brands would fall into the category of great brand in your mind with regards to software? Like specifically software, not necessarily software enabled. I guess you could say Casper is a physical product leveraging technology.
Yeah, there aren't. That's the thing in tech. a lot of brand, like for example, so Everpedia is challenging Wikipedia,
Right.
and part of the reason why we think our challenge is going to be successful is because the people who volunteer for Wikipedia don't seem to be super passionate about it.
Okay.
A lot of them are doing it because they think maybe it'll lead to a job. A lot of them are doing it because they can't think of anything better. But no one looks at Wikipedia and is like, "Oh, this is awesome!" And it's because it doesn't look sexy. It looks very unsophisticated. So it hasn't really done a. It's more like a Sealy than like a Nike, to use the previous examples we were talking about.
Right.
You do have things like Instagram and Snapchat. Basically, the two brands in software and internet that I think look like they're going to achieve Nike status are Instagram and Snapchat.
Right.
They're both very sexy and they're cool in a way that even Google and Facebook and Apple are not. And then obviously, I think I'm a bit biased, but I think Genius. Rap Genius is doing a good job of putting itself into that category as well. For example, having all of these rappers who are not only passionately using the product, but a few of them are even investing. Like, Nas is an investor, Pharrell is an investor, Eminem just invested. So I think that is hopefully going to help to put Genius into the Nike category of cult brands as well.
And now, do you see any fundamental principles that these brands seem to be adhering to? Like you mentioned, uh, this word passion, which seems like a bit of a, not that you said it in like a nebulous way, but you hear it all the time in the culture, like follow your passion, do things that you're passionate about. Like, what does passion mean in the context of a business or a brand? And both at Everpedia, like you're doing that right now, but also at Genius, what were there things that you guys were thinking about to say, okay, how can we build this community? I know that was a huge aspect and still is a huge aspect of Genius, as well as at Everpedia, this idea of community. Um,
Well, when you want to build a sick brand, like I was saying, you basically want to build a cult.
right.
And one thing that's not necessary, but I think helps a lot, is having the charismatic cult leader, the face of the cult.
Mm.
But a lot of brands don't have that. Like, Instagram, like I was saying, is probably the hottest, trendiest internet brand. And the CEO, Kevin Systrom, a lot of people don't even know what he looks like.
Yeah.
He's not really very outspoken. So that doesn't really go with what I'm saying. Snapchat, though, you could say that I think part of Snapchat's success is that it's tied together in people's minds with the CEO who's like dating an underwear model,
Right.
and he used to sell his company, and he seems like he doesn't give a fuck.
Right.
So that's more along the lines of what I'm talking about of having a cult leader. I think that's the role I was playing at Genius for a while. And then when I left, it seems like now kind of the guy who's known as Mr. Genius is Rob Markman, who joined the team from MTV
Okay.
a few months after I left.
And do you think that could maybe go astray? So I think a great place to take this example that you're talking about, I can see that you see the cult leader in a kind of good examples with like Steve Jobs, right? He's probably the quintessential cult leader, I guess you could say. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but in some ways, Apple is a mixed bag, because on the one hand, and the iPhone is basically the biggest status symbol we have. Everyone,
Yeah,
they
so
think
true.
like you're not cool if you don't have an iPhone, and so in that sense. But then the name Apple itself, like I remember when Apple acquired Beats.
Yeah.
And I found out that they're gonna replace a lot of the Beats stuff with the Apple brand.
Yeah.
I thought that's a big mistake, because
Why
I was
is
just
that?
thinking to myself that I was thinking when I hear Beats, I think it's cool, and when I hear Apple, I don't think it's cool.
And what were
And
they?
they kind of backtrack, like they call the radio station Beats Radio and stuff. So I think they kind of figured it out. But
That's interesting. Like the fact that they're keeping those brands separate. Do you think that they have distinct meaning, like Apple versus Beats, or
yeah, I
kind
mean
of?
Beats is a trend. And also the fact that Dr. Dre is the figure. Steve Jobs. Some people find him really inspiring, especially tech people. But your random person off the street is not going to be that into Steve Jobs,
Right,
just
right,
because he didn't have the right look, he didn't really have the right way of talking
right,
for a mass audience. But then you
right.
have Dr. Dre, who is amazing. But it helped that he started as a rapper, but even in his post-rap career, he's done such a good job of building a cult of personality around himself.
Right. Yeah, and I guess do you see that going astray in some examples? Like, for example, Uber. Um, Travis Kalanick, I guess you could say, is the the cult leader to a certain extent, and perhaps that has not had the best. It's not had the best impact. Maybe you could say.
Yeah.
So, what are your
He
thoughts on that?
basically he's the dude who could have really hit a home run, and he seems to be fucking up in a big way. There was that video of him arguing with the Uber black driver,
Right.
and if he just would have changed his behavior a little, what I liked about his behavior in that video was that he was talking to the driver like they're boys, like they were arguing, but he wasn't trying to sound like a shithead CEO. He kind of sounded like he's an Uber driver himself, and he was talking about the logic behind lowering the fares and things like that. But ultimately, the way that it was spun and the way that people interpreted that video was that this dude is totally alienating all of his drivers. That's another issue. Like when you have a brand, there's two different people. There's two different categories that you're marketing the brand to. There's your fans, and then there's your super insane psycho fans.
Right.
And it might not be the same things that resonate with both of them. A lot of times it might actually be contrary to one another. But the super psycho fans, one super psycho fan might be worth 100 regular fans. So if you think about it, like for Uber, the super psycho fans are the drivers. These are the people who the company is making money off of their labor. So Uber needs to just do a really, really good job of brainwashing them into thinking like, yo, we've got your back, we're on your side. And with the leak of that video and the way that it was spun by the press, Travis Kalanick failed at that. I think if you ask the average Uber driver, like, yo, does Travis Kalanick have your back? Or is he more on the side of the consumers? They would say that he's on the consumer side and he's trying to rip his drivers off.
So that leads me to to think about some interesting things. So the first thing that comes to my mind is that first, at what point does brand end and business strategy begin, or vice versa, or are they always intertwined? Because like the Uber example, you have like the supply side and the demand side. So and you're saying, okay, you should really be focused on the drivers. And I think that probably the easiest logical next step would be to say, oh, but what happens when, autonomous vehicles or whatever, however long or short it is in the future, I don't know. I'm not a programmer, or a AI programmer, so I wouldn't really know. I couldn't tell you how long it is or isn't in the future. But I guess that's a business strategy issue. And at what point does brand and business strategy start to diverge, or are they always in unison, in your opinion, based on your experience?
Even in this case, your brand is very, very important.
Right.
You could make the argument brand is really all you have, because any software you have or any fancy science, if any knowledge you have, someone can just steal it from you or copy it.
Right.
So really, all any business has is a brand loyalty and community.
Yes.
But then especially if there's a divergence between how you want to market yourself, like for example with Genius and Everpedia, our drivers are basically the people who are part of the community, the people who are creating content.
Right.
And our passengers are the people who, way more of them. We have a couple hundred people writing the content, and we have millions and millions of people reading it.
Right.
So we also have to decide, how do we want to balance this? How much of the website, for example, and the design of the website do we want to be tailored to someone who's writing versus someone who's reading? And it can be pretty challenging to make the correct balance. In Uber's case, I think you got a really good point, that part of the reason why they don't worry about the drivers too much is because they're probably thinking to themselves, in 5 years or so, we won't even have drivers anymore. So we just want to be known as the cheap one. We want to be the cheapest one. We'll keep lowering the prices, even if the drivers feel like they're getting ripped off, because we just need the customers to think, I'm always going to get the best deal with Uber.
And do you think that that's a great? I know we're harping on Uber a lot, but do you think that's a good strategy, like brand strategy, in that in the past has it doesn't seem like price or being the value option is always, or in the past has led to a sustainable brand. Like I love Nike as well, and it's not the cheapest. It's definitely emotionally the most resonant for me. But what are your thoughts on that with regards to Uber?
The biggest rule of economics is you don't want to be a commodity.
Right.
If it's commodities and perfect competition, profits go down to zero.
That's right.
And Uber is kind of a commodity service.
Right.
Even though they made a big breakthrough technology, it's something that can be copied by anybody. So it seems like their future is that their profits are someday going to go to zero. So maybe it's not the best business, at least in the long term. It's cooler to build something like Rap Genius or Everpedia than something like Uber. But then again, but by the time that long term arrives,
right,
they have already made billions and billions of dollars.
Right, they could have captured a lot of the value that they created. Now, so do you think that, well, I have here as a question, do you think branding is important? And you sort of already said that you think that brand is incredibly important. So I'm going to change a little bit the question and ask you, especially someone entrenched in tech, do you believe that brand is appreciated enough? And do you think that enough attention is given to brand?
You mean in tech or in business in general?
Both. Let's maybe start with tech.
So with tech, the people who have been running tech for most of the past 20 years have been kind of nerdy people. The people who get into code and are technical, They tend to be pretty nerdy, and they don't have the greatest brand instincts.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, actually. So Rap Genius was in Y Combinator in 2011.
Yeah.
And on our first day in Y Combinator, Paul Graham, who at that point was still the head of Y Combinator, gave a talk. And in the talk, he kind of talked about how when Y Combinator started, they shunned like the MBA founders. All they wanted was to find the next Mark Zuckerberg. So they were looking at the founders who had built their own products and knew how to code. And he told us that they were kind of changing their strategy about that. And they were starting to let in more MBAs and stuff. Because I think Silicon Valley is finally catching on that, like, even though our science and our engineering might be really fancy, all of it will eventually just become fungible. So we need people who are more cool. It makes sense, for example, that like Zuck, who was not the most brand aware CEO of all time was the guy who was, the hot shit 10 years ago. But then now Evan Spiegel, who's like, Zuck 2.0, is way more. For example, the way that they marketed spectacles. Spectacles
incredible.
are something that could totally have gone either way,
Incredible.
but they managed to make it into kind of a trendy, hip thing for teenagers by doing the flash mobs and like last second telling you where the vending machine's going to be.
Yeah.
Putting them in cool places. Like one time, some of the Everpedia team members went, like at 8 a.m., they went to Griffith Park because there was going to be a spectacles vending machine there. And I was just like, holy shit, like Facebook never pulled off any cult status stunts like this.
What are your thoughts on Snapchat? Both as a brand and as a business. I know that we're sort of saying that brand and business are one and the same, and I totally agree. As someone who, practices branding or brand strategy for a living, I 100% agree. But
so I'm not that into Snapchat. Like I have an account, but I don't use it very much. First of all, because I think the appeal of the technology to people is that they want to live their lives more hidden. Like they like that they can share photos and videos without it being accessible somewhere on the internet.
Right.
And that's not the kind of person I am at all. Like I obviously like my message to be heard by as many people as possible, and I have a big following on Facebook and Twitter. So I'm not really looking for my privacy. So I don't think Snapchat is really up my alley in that sense.
Right.
And then also the app is just kind of tricky to master.
Yeah, it is.
Like I remember right when I started using it, I didn't realize that you could check who had viewed your stories. And then someone showed me how to do it. But I think the trickiness is kind of part of why they have the cult status as well. The teenagers kind of feel really smart, that they know all the ins and outs of Snapchat and they're really good at using it, and their parents, they figure their parents could never figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, the things that I don't necessarily like about their product, I still think work well with the brand that they've built, and that's part of the reason they're having so much success.
Do you think that that's sustainable moving forward? I know that a lot of with the IPO, a lot of people are bullish and a lot of people are bearish, and I think the people who are bearish echo a lot of the same concerns or a lot of the same like they don't necessarily get Snapchat as I'm part of that group as well.
Yeah.
So moving forward, do you think that it's sustainable to keep this same type of brand, this brand strategy, and will that be able to do really well in the future, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'm pretty bullish about Snapchat. For one thing, even though the Facebook and Instagram clones are getting a lot of users, I don't think they'll be able to serve the same function, because if you have a Facebook or an Instagram account, it's public facing, and the whole point of Snapchat is that you don't have that public facing side to it.
Right.
That being said, I still think that it was smart of Facebook and Instagram to copy the stories, just because it's a cool UI that people got familiar with off of Snapchat, and it's useful for them to have it on these other platforms too.
Right.
But I think Snapchat will be fine. I think the fact that I don't know if they timed this on purpose or not, but the fact that Spectacles dropped right when Facebook released its cloned copies was really, really smart, because it was basically Snapchat saying like, yo, we're cooler than you. Even when you copy our last thing that blew up, we're already on to the next thing that's going to blow up. And like, you can copy that too, but then we'll be on to the third thing. And I get the sense from talking to the young developers who are just getting out of college and starting work, that Snapchat seems to be like where everyone wants to work. It's like it's on Venice Beach.
Yeah.
It seems like cool. You don't have to move to Silicon Valley. So I think they're going to be good. I think Snapchat's going to be a really successful company.
And do you think that they're gonna? Do you think that I've heard a lot of people say that they think Snapchat could become a physical brand company, like they could start making products as they did with spectacles, but
Yeah.
more traditional products. Do you see that? I know it's a bit of conjecture, but do you see that as a possible tactic or moving forward?
It is smart. It's definitely smart. One thing that makes me upset sometimes about Silicon Valley investors and Y Combinator there's an obsession with hardware.
Yeah,
Everyone's decided it's been like this for 4 or 5 years now that investors are always like, I don't want to invest in another software thing. I want to invest in hardware.
yeah,
And then that leads to these debacles like, Juicero got $120 million to build this pointless machine, and it's really embarrassing. So I don't fully understand the obsession with hardware. That being said, like I said before, I think Spectacles was really, really cool. Even though it's not really up my alley, and um, I wouldn't really use it. It's one of the first pieces of tech hardware that I saw really, really became a fashion trend.
right.
Popular, cool people were proud to be seen with their spectacles in a way that you can't say about most other gadgets. Like the Apple Watch, for example, was never considered cool in that same way. But then, Beats headphones were like for teenagers. Beats headphones became a status symbol in that same way. So it would be cool. I think that they could definitely do it. It's one thing. It's interesting that Facebook has never released any kind of hardware. I guess they're going to be doing like AR VR stuff with the Oculus acquisition.
Yeah, it seems that the AR of it seems very. I guess it's an emerging technology, but it seems very similar to Snapchat as well. Yeah, like the
Yeah, we're not too high tech at Everpedia. The only, if you can call it hardware, like the only merch idea we've had is in a couple months from now, we're gonna let people buy merch that has a wiki printed on it.
okay.
So if you have your own wiki, you'll be able to get a T-shirt that just has your wiki printed on it. So that might be kind of cool.
Okay, so I'd love to talk about Everpedia, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you're a team, a small team. How do you guys think about? I know obviously it's an emerging. You're trying to find product market fit, for lack of a better phrase. Uh, but do you think about brand? Is that something that you think about at a very very early stage, or is it
Yeah.
something that oh, you do definitely. Okay.
Totally. Well, so it's funny. The first time when Sam, who's our CEO, showed me Everpedia, the first thing that I said, I was like, "So basically, you're trying to build a thug Wikipedia." He's like, "Yeah, exactly, thug Wikipedia." And we got so excited. Like the first T-shirts we ever made for the site said thugwikipedia.com, and like we own the domain thugwikipedia.com, and we have it redirect to Everpedia.
Oh, that's cool.
But then people started getting mad. Reporters started to ask, like, why do you call it the Thug Wikipedia? Is it because, like, you want bad people to use it? And I
Okay.
think people just didn't understand what we mean by the word thug.
Okay.
So now we're kind of shying away from it, but the community that already exists, right now we have a community of a couple hundred people. And I think a lot of them were drawn into this idea of, I want to write for the Thug Wikipedia.
Right. 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 So it's something that was top of mind from the start.
Yeah, I think it was a good branding hack for getting started. But now that the site is getting pretty big and we're trying to get more corporate, we're trying to put our thug ways behind us.
What do you mean by getting more corporate? I've heard you speak about this with regards to Genius as well.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And like, and this like you, I use that term as well, and it seems to me like for me when I think of corporate, it's something that's incredibly sterile, and very rigid, and to some extent maybe that's the antithetical or the opposite of of brand, of like a really authentic brand? I don't know. That's just kind of what goes off in my head. So I'd love for you to expand
Yeah.
on that.
In some ways, it's the opposite, but in some ways, what I do is the opposite. Because so basically, my sort of style of thug guerrilla community building, um, it makes young people, high school and college, and the people who you want to get into your community really excited because they're sick of dealing with cookie cutter bullshit and hearing the same thing from everybody. So they hear me, and they hear me talking shit about a rich person. They hear me using colorful language that you wouldn't normally see coming from a company's Twitter, and they think this is a breath of fresh air. This is exciting.
Mm.
But then that same sort of rhetoric can be off-putting to two important groups, those being investors and advertisers.
Mm.
So I think once you start to get the big investments and once you start to think about running native ads and selling ads directly to brands, then the guerrilla style starts to become more of a liability.
Mm.
So I think my guerrilla style was crucial to building Genius and getting Genius to the point where Ben Horowitz invested $15 million.
Right.
But after he invested the $15 million, even though I was doing the same exact shit, like I didn't change my thing, but people suddenly switched on me from saying like, "Hey, Mahbod, we loved this tweet. We loved, like, you went after this guy and he responded and we got a bunch of traffic from it," to getting upset when I would do stuff like that. So that's why I think my style is I can basically come into a company, sprinkle a little bit of fairy dust on it, and get it to a couple million users, which is
And
what I did with Genius and what I've now done with Everpedia. But then it's time for me to kind of start to scale back my involvement, and then that's when the CEO has to step up. And luckily, with both of my companies, the person in charge has been a really, really brilliant, capable, technical CEO who built the product himself. So that's basically what happened. Is that when I resigned from Genius, when my thug style started to cause some troubles, I resigned from Genius, and then Tom was able to bring in the corporate staff and start to make things more like an office and less like a cult. And it totally worked. The site is still growing really fast. It's getting a ton of press. It's making a lot of money.
So it's because it seems to me, so you're building the sort of like the foundational infrastructure of a brand, you could say, is that beginning stage.
Yeah, except it doesn't even end up being the infrastructure. It's more that it is the spark
It's the
that just
spark,
gets
right?
going.
Right.
And then once it gets going, you actually have to destroy that whole infrastructure and build a new infrastructure that's going to be the permanent, less exciting, but then also less offensive, uh, long-term infrastructure.
So that's sort of like a double-edged sword, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you have this thing that, as in you kind of beautifully put, it's the spark, but at the same time, that same spark could turn into a fire that burns a thing to the ground.
No, I don't. That won't happen if there's the competent CEO. If you have
Competency.
I'm basically a wannabe Sean Parker. I think the guy who invented this role of I'm the guy who gets it poppin' and then I'm going to go on to the next project is Sean Parker.
Right.
And he had already made Napster hot, and then he came on board with Facebook and he made Facebook hot. But then I don't know how much of the movie is true, but I guess he was throwing cocaine parties or whatever. But then Zuck was able to step in and make it corporate and listen to all of Ben Horowitz's advice, and now the company's worth $500 billion.
Right. Yeah.
So that's sort of the strategy that I've been trying to do with both of my companies. And I think the reason it's going to work is because both of my CEOs are basically wannabe Zucks. Tom is kind of like, he's uh, just total wannabe Zuck type guy, and then Sam, the Everpedia CEO, we actually call him the Persian Zuck.
What does that mean? Just because Mark Zuckerberg has built Facebook, or because Mark Zuckerberg embodies certain traits that uh, a visionary CEO embodies?
Well, the biggest breakthrough that Mark Zuckerberg made was that he stayed CEO. So he kind of changed the Silicon Valley nomenclature. Because Google, the two founders, had let Eric Schmidt, who was the grown-up, take the title of CEO.
Right.
But Facebook had Sheryl Sandberg as the grown-up, and they had her take the title of COO, and kept Mark Zuckerberg as CEO.
Right.
And I think from a brand perspective, from a philosophical perspective, that is a big, big, big change. And he's the one who spearheaded it, and that's the reason why I think Facebook is going to be way more successful than Google, because it has the cult figure right at the top, and his title is still CEO, even if he's not the behind the scenes grown up of the company. So I think that makes a big difference.
And now, it seems like so. Do you think that there's a thread that is common throughout all these different stages, from like the nascent stages and kind of guerrilla stages, as you put it, in the beginning, and then through where the grown-up CEO comes, or you have this Mark Zuckerberg type figure who stays on as a competent founder that can also lead a relatively or a very large organization. But it seems like there's this theme or this thread through the middle of like the guiding North Star. I know that Mark Zuckerberg talks about the guiding North Star, which to me as a brand person seems like very much so this brand thing, right? Which is like this vision of the future. Um, do you think that is true, for lack of a better word, or do you think that that's that's subject to shift? I think maybe with Facebook you're seeing it shift a little bit, with the whole copying of Snapchat and such. But I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, those philosophies have never meant a lot to me. I'm not a big like grand strategy, grand vision person. I think it's fine for a company to just do a lot of stuff that's cool.
But how do you define cool? How does a company then define cool if they don't have this overarching?
So for example, Genius, when Ben Horowitz invested, we were like, we're going to annotate the whole internet.
Right.
And then
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Then all of the non-music annotation projects started to kind of wither. Meanwhile, music's doing really, really well. Music has like blown up even bigger.
Right.
So the company has sort of doubled back down on music. And there was an article in The Verge or Vox or one of those crappy sites talking shit and basically saying like Genius has given up on the bigger vision.
Right.
And on the one hand, like I think if I was there, if I had stayed with the company, I could have made the web annotator and the non-music verticals blow up.
Okay. How would you have done that?
Just the same way that I made the music stuff blow up. I would have been using it. I would have used it to do cool stuff. So I don't think that it was a mistake. But then that being said, the fact that music was blowing up and Tom decided to just double back down on music, that doesn't make me upset either. The site's still blowing up. It's like top 100 on Alexa in the US now, and it's making a lot of money. So I think that the Vox article that was talking shit was just written by a hater. He was just being an idiot.
And we're trying to make news.
Yeah, I'm not as much about top down as I am bottom up. I think what you do is you put out any products that you think are cool, and then you see what people start using, and then whatever people start using, you respond organically and you try to keep building features to make them want to use it more.
So that's a really interesting idea, or or way of thinking about it. So, but that's inherently a software way of thinking about things. So you have the ability to ship and iterate, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas, so how would you think about that in the context of a brand that's maybe not um, software? So like Nike is a great example. How, like, is Nike to do physical good brands or retail brands have to go from the top down? Which is hard to do in this new technological or digital age. It's really difficult to do
Yeah.
because
Well, Nike is an interesting example because the whole reason that their customers love them is because they don't listen to us. Like if
right,
they have a really, really popular shoe, not only will they not make more of it, they'll actually make less of it because they want it to be limited edition and they want people to, oh, I wish I had this pair.
right.
So yeah, it's true that, and maybe it's not the best approach, but that's just what my companies do, and we've had some success with it. But maybe there is room to have more of a grand strategy.
Hmm.
The reason why I've never been into it is because I like to keep people happy. I'm not one of those. Even with the stuff that I post on Facebook and Twitter, I'm not really the type of person who's trying to espouse my own viewpoints because I don't really have any strong viewpoints. I'm just kind of agnostic about anything. Like, I can always see both sides of any controversy. So I think that's part of why I have more of a impetus to just try to listen to the audience. But yeah, if you can pull it off, basically Nike tells me what I should think is cool, and I just obey them. Like the brand has this godlike authority in my head.
So it seems to me that a lot of brands have this. Uh, in my view, it's like this distinct point of view on the world. Like they have like a very stubborn way of looking at things, and that's how they're going to go about it. But I totally agree with you about this ground up.
Well, I think you make a good point also that when you're software, it's easier to listen to the audience because it's a lot easier to iterate.
But
Whereas
what?
with your hardware, you kind of have to be like, yo, this is what we're selling. We developed it. We made it. We hope you like it.
But how, like, in a digital world, even physical, even like physical good brands, the Nikes or the Casper or anything like that, they have a software component to them just by the nature of how people are living. So then the question is, well, do we have a distinct point of view with our product, and we're kind of listening to the audience with our digital presence, right? It's
Yeah.
like what's the tug of war there, So I think that's a very interesting thing to think about. I'm not sure. I don't know what the right answer is. Perhaps there's not even a right answer. So I don't know.
I'd be interested to know like if Nike even has like a future digital strategy, because like in some ways they were very, very cutting edge. I remember I got a pair of Nike ID shoes when I was in law school, like 10 years ago. So they were already letting you customize your shoes online and
Right.
shit a long,
Right.
long time. But then it's kind of just stayed the way that it is. They haven't really made any advancements on that. And then also one thing that pissed me off about the Nike IDs
Mm-hmm.
was you can't get. They only have like 5 different styles that you can get that you can custom order, and none of them are like the more vintage, old school Nike styles that I'm a big fan of. So it doesn't seem like the most high-tech brand. Like even though in some ways they've been very ahead of it, I think that they basically just don't want to. They don't want to dirty their image by adding too much high-tech shit.
And so circling back to this idea of the becoming too corporate, um, is that a disadvantage? I think perhaps it is, in my opinion, but I'm interested in your
Well, for who?
for Nike.
Oh, I don't know. Well, I don't. It's weird. Like I've met a few people who work there, and it seems like it is a very very corporate ass place. So it's. I guess they just break all the rules. It's kind of hard to because like now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of the things that I think of as rules of thumb in branding for myself, Nike is just completely, totally doing the opposite. But then they just have so much star power and such a cult built around them that anything they do, just people have to go with it.
And what are the rules of thumb for branding that you have in your mind?
Um, a big part of it is just listen to people. I'm always like, for example, I really liked calling it Thug Wikipedia and having the Thug Wikipedia T-shirts.
Right.
But we started to have reporters give us a hard time about it, and we were like, okay, never mind, we can come up with something better than that. But now we use Encyclopedia of Everything.
Okay.
It's not that great, and we've been experimenting with the largest English encyclopedia, because Everpedia has all of Wikipedia in it. Plus, we have a million articles that they don't have. So, like, technically, right now, we're already the largest English language encyclopedia. So, trying to find out something that keeps everyone happy.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. And one thing that I saw at um, Genius is this genius isms, I think it's called, or
Yeah,
genius.
that. So interesting you bring that up, because
Yeah.
that
Okay.
was
Let's get into it.
that really pissed me off right at the end. So the reason why they called it the isms,
Yeah.
because Dan Gilbert, who he's a billionaire, he's Warren Buffett's homie, he's the guy who invested $40 million in the company, and like he owns the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Okay.
So we went to his training session for his company,
Okay.
which is like the most corporate thing you can imagine. It was in Cleveland, Ohio, and he had us come and like sit in the employee training session for 3 days
Okay.
to kind of show us like, yo, this is how you become corporate. And then his corporate session is called the isms. So then Tom decided when we got back from that he's going to write our corporate handbook, and we wanted him to call our corporate handbook the memes. Just because meme was like a popular word in the office. We used the word meme not to mean like a picture on the internet. We would use it just to mean like a thing, something that everyone's talking about.
Right, like the spread of an idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we wanted him to just call this like, the genius memes, like the memes of working at Genius. And then last second, he decided to just copy Dan Gilbert and call his handbook the isms as well.
Okay.
And I remember that just made me so depressed. That was like the last couple months that I was at the company, and I just felt like we're copying our corporate master, who like doesn't even know anything about our company.
So do you think that those, specifically not the name that they have, like I know in a lot of other companies they're called values, and um I know Airbnb has like 6 of them, right? I think that was a big thing for Airbnb.
Oh.
Um, but do you think that that's important? Like this idea of having um, authentic values that are written down and that everybody can see.
I guess. I mean, it's kind of like that is the official signal that it's time for me to get a new job. Like
Okay.
once
Okay.
there's
Wow.
once there's a handbook, unless you want my help to like maybe write a couple jokes for the handbook.
Okay. So do you think that that's authentic with a company like Airbnb that seems to be, there's this iconic thing that I think Peter Thiel said to what's the founder's name? Brian Chesky, right?
Uh
He said, don't fuck up the values, or something along those lines, or
huh.
don't fuck up the culture, something along those lines. Do you think that values and culture are intertwined, or?
Well, I think with Airbnb, part of the reason that they brag so much about their handbook is that they say that's how they were able to set up in different cities so quickly. Is that they just kind of had the official rollout. Like, okay, we're in London now. Step 1 is this. Step 2 is this. Step 3 is this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I'm against these kinds of values. It's more just like when the team has gotten to the size that you need it to be written down, and you need to like hand it out to new employees and stuff, then you're probably already at the level where the things that I can add value to are not going to be that important anymore. So
So there. Okay, so I'm hearing that there are definitely. This is something that I have not really thought about before, so it's very interesting and good. I think is that there's different stages to brand building. Very much like how you like the traditional like business school, like the different stages of companies, like growth and maturation and all that. So I guess you would also say that there's these stages to building a brand, and it's not just this static thing. That it's dynamic over the course of a.
yeah, I'm bristling at the handbooks because like I told you the story. It kind of gave me like bad flashbacks of like that was my last like evil corporate memory before leaving Genius. It's like when he decided to name the handbook Isms, and I'm like, no.
Okay, cool. All right. Are there any? We talked about the definition of a good brand, and it's clear to you that branding is important. As this, I believe that it's incredibly important as well. Um, but what is your definition of a bad brand? Is a bad brand necessarily corporate, or is it people that don't listen to the audience, or how do you think about that?
Well, I think someone who had a good brand and then totally fucked it up was Foursquare.
Oh, great. Okay,
Foursquare was like probably the biggest downfall of a brand of all time.
Why? Why is that?
Well, I never really used it, but I think the thing that really pissed people off was that they decided to rename what was called Foursquare Swarm.
Right, I remember that.
And then they built a new thing that had nothing to do with Foursquare, and they called that Foursquare. And
Right.
that just seems like a totally, totally stupid move. Like, I'm sure they probably had some sort of, like, internal logic for doing it that way in the boardrooms and stuff, but as an armchair quarterback, I could have told them. And they totally had a cult following, too. Like, people would get so excited about being the mayor. Like, you would hear grown, educated people bragging, like, yo, I'm the mayor of this place. I'm the mayor of that place.
And for people that don't know, explain the mayor.
I think you would just get it from checking in the most number of times. Whoever has checked to a business the most number of times is the mayor, and a lot of times, like, the mayor gets a free sandwich or the mayor gets 10% off, and things like that. So, and they probably thought it's not a big deal. The people who love Foursquare, they'll still be using it. It'll just be called Swarm now. But for some reason, changing the name just totally pissed everyone off. And like it kind of made it click with them. Like, what am I doing on this app pretending I'm a 5-year-old anyways? Like, bragging about being the mayor.
So it seems, just listening to you, it seems like they did exactly what the type of thing that you did with Genius, in that they built this community in the beginning and people loved it. They built that cult. And one of your rules of thumb is that you have to listen to the audience, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they didn't do.
I guess not. Yeah. No, I don't know. I don't know what the thinking was of doing it, but now you look back with hindsight, and it seems like they just made such a dumb move changing the name.
Right.
I was pretty scared. I was never one of the ones who wanted to change to Genius.com. For Rap Genius, my dream was the same way that, like, Gawker has 10 different websites. They have Gizmodo, they have Jezebel.
Right.
So I just wanted to have like rockgenius.com, biblegenius.com. And like my dream was that the people who are on Bible Genius wouldn't even know that Rap Genius existed. Like one day someone tells you, Bible Genius actually got its start from a site called Rap Genius. And the contributor like, oh, I never even knew that. So I kind of just wanted these more siloed off sites. I think one of the reasons why the annotating everything didn't take off was because we switched to Genius.com. Like, we switched to Genius.com, and then that didn't help us to get any like Bible annotators or news annotators or anything. It kind of freaked out the OGs, like, the music heads, the hip hop heads who were in the community. But then to correct for that, Tom basically just made Genius.com Rap Genius. Like, if you go to Genius.com right now, everything on the front page is about music.
Yeah. That's so true. That's so true. I remember, like, I like to read certain books and essays and etc. And I remember I remember hearing that Rap Genius went to Genius, and I went to Genius.com thinking that, oh man, could I like I think the thing is like to dig deeper or look deeper or something like that. And I was thinking to myself, oh, can I like look at books that I've always read and dig deeper into those books? And I couldn't. So, and I just listened to like More Life. And try and figure out what Drake is saying. So it's true. It is quite tethered to music, and that makes me think about Alphabet, and Alphabet being this parent or somewhat governing body of Google. What are your thoughts on that, with regards to branding?
Well, so I was saying that, like, I don't think grand strategy is that important, and you can just do a lot of cool stuff. But I don't think you want to become a conglomerate. Like, it's pretty much established. In the 1960s, people thought being a conglomerate was good. They thought that it adds diversification to your company, and all these companies, they kind of like turn themselves into conglomerates, and it led to a lot of spectacular failures.
Right.
Because you do sort of need a unifying culture. It's just weird for two people to be working at the same company, and one of them's like, I make shoes, and the other one's like, I program radios. Like, they have nothing to do with one another.
Right.
And Google has become a conglomerate. I think that's why they changed the name, was basically to recognize that it's become a conglomerate.
Right.
And
I agree.
Who wants to work for Google? Go talk to like the really, really gunner engineering students that are graduating from Stanford.
Yeah.
They don't want to work at Google. They want to work at Snapchat. Maybe like, if they're nerds, they want to work at Facebook. But like Google at this point, it's like, that's like saying you're going to go work for Procter and Gamble,
Right. Oh, that's so true.
So I think they became too much of a conglomerate. Changing the name recognized that, but it kind of even made the problem worse. And then they picked this guy as their CEO, who like, he seems like a nice guy and everything.
Yeah,
and
Sundar. Yeah.
He's a career Googler, but he's not inspiring or charismatic or anything good. So hopefully this is the beginning of the end for Google. Hopefully this will, just like Microsoft is becoming less and less of a potent force as time goes. I think Google has hit its apex and is now going to start to decline.
So do you think there's any way for a company like their business is just so robust that do you think there's any way for their brand to get, I don't want to say get to the level of Snapchat, because I think that's kind of got a kind of naive way of thinking about it, but to have a brand that's still resonant in the eyes of the people interacting with the product, Like, for example, I think of Google at the present moment as like just as a utility, which I think it's smart and I think it's great, but it's to me it's a utility.
Yeah.
Um,
You're not proud that you're using Google.
Not necessarily. The only thing I would be proud of is to know that to have the trust that it works, and maybe that's a whole type of different brand altogether. But
Yeah.
I'm interested in your thoughts.
No, you nailed it. I mean, if you remember Google Plus, Google Plus was just like the biggest shitty crash and burn ripoff in history. And it shows you how well Facebook did the Facebook built the Snapchat clone, and it's at least people are using it. Whereas
Right.
Google Plus was just a total pie in the face embarrassment, and it's because Google doesn't have the right kind of culture. And I've never been a big fan of their company. I think that the reason why their company just like didn't become as great as it could have been is because they let the outsider grown-up guy become the CEO, and the two founders seemed like they don't care that much. Like, one of them was like sleeping with his employee and getting into trouble doing stuff like that. So they just more wanted to have fun. They didn't want to build an empire the way that Mark Zuckerberg wants to build an empire.
So in that case, the grand vision is important.
Yes. Although, and then the other thing, like the reason why I think Google can't even recover, it's not like they can even spin off some of their conglomerate stuff and try to refocus, is just because, as Joseph Schumpeter says, the greatest force in capitalism is creative destruction.
Yeah, absolutely.
No one's going to stay on top for more than like 20 years.
Absolutely right.
And I think that's healthy. I think it's good. Like, basically, the way that capitalism works is you come, you blow up, you make your money, and then it's time to step aside and let the next person step up.
Do you think that is going to remain true in a future where it's kind of a winner-take-all market, where you have these big, like Google, like there's no other search engine. Google is search, right? And you could say to a certain extent that, thank God, well, not thank God, but you could imagine a future or a past where Facebook actually did acquire Snapchat, and Snapchat would be, or Facebook would own, all social interaction on the web, right? So do you think that these companies will have will continue that cycle of creative destruction with so much power?
I think creative destruction is here to stay. I think it's a part of human culture. It's a part of human psychology. And you'd think like the internet has vastly larger economies of scale. So natural monopolies, economies of scale. So you'd think that would challenge creative destruction, but the reason it won't is because the audience, culture just wants to see the yesterday's success step down and the next person step up. So like one interesting that's going on in my life right now is that Jimmy Wales just announced that he's building an Everpedia competitor, Wiki Tribune.
And for people that don't know, Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia.
The founder of Wikipedia. So one way that Everpedia has been getting a lot of traffic is that we make wikis about breaking news. Right. And Wikipedia has a rule that they don't make wikis for breaking news. They wait for like stuff to settle down so they can see how important the event actually was. And it's like, meanwhile, people want wikis for breaking news. They want just a place with like organized crowd knowledge about what they're reading about in the news. So Jimmy Wales decided he's going to launch this thing, Wiki Tribune, which is basically going to be Wikipedia for news, kind of to compete with Everpedia. And it got a lot of press and all, but the reason why I'm not worried and I don't think it's going to be a success is A, because he doesn't have any technical talent himself, and I don't think he's going to be able to find like really, really killer developers, like the kind of people we have building Everpedia. And two, it's because he's kind of an old guy. He's been around the internet since 2001, so no one wants to see him launch the next big thing. They want to see my CEO, who's like, he's 24-year-old immigrant genius, very charismatic, very cool in interviews. People are going to want to see him blow up. So nice try, Jimmy, but I don't think you're going to have too much success.
Okay, so I want to be cognizant of your time. You've been really gracious with the amount of time that you've been speaking with me. So I have a few.
Man.
I have a few. I have one question tethered to that, and then I have a couple of quick fire like stream of consciousness questions. So you bring up Jimmy Wales and news, and I'm interested in your take on the old brands of news, especially in this. I guess you could say political climate, but not really. I think it's more um, just the nature of how people are consuming media. Um, I'm interested in your take on news brands. What does that even mean? And what does that look like moving forward?
Well, for me, the Nike of news is the Wall Street Journal. For some
Why is that?
reason,
Why is that?
I've always. I'm sorry.
Why is that?
I guess maybe I just really like the font. Just like with Nike, I like the swoosh. I just like how the paper looks. And I remember, like when I was working as a lawyer, I didn't have a subscription, but my neighbor had a subscription, and he wouldn't use it, so I would just like jack his newspaper every day.
Okay.
And I felt so alpha. I just had the Wall Street Journal, and I like how the different sections look. So I've always been a big fan of theirs. And whereas like the company that I'm kind of like waging beef against is the New York Times. I'm really looking forward to them someday just going under.
What? So, what do you think the creative destruction of news is? Like, you have these creative. Who's coming in and going to be the downfall of the news infrastructure? Like, what does that look like in your opinion? I know it's hard to predict the future, but
I'm talking creative destruction, and yet I'm saying I read this really old newspaper. So But I should be more into new media, but the new media companies just have not really impressed me. Like Vox and The Verge, for some reason they've decided they have beef with my website, and I'm not impressed by the founder. I remember I was making Ezra Klein's wiki, the founder of Vox,
okay,
and I was just like, you can tell this guy had no friends in college. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And then BuzzFeed, I'm not very impressed by. I think it's kind of weird that they started out just being like shitty listicles and stuff, and then they got money from Ben Horowitz, and now they're like, we're going to replace the New York Times. So I still think there's room. The creative destructor of news has not stepped up yet. I think someone who's actually legit is going to step up and make a really, really sick new media company. Or maybe new media is just kind of an oxymoron. The thing is that the future of media might just be more like social media.
Yeah, like user-generated.
Yeah, maybe Everpedia is what's going to destroy the New York Times, because we're going to have professional journalists. It's not like we're planning for – even right now, the community is not just all volunteers. We've got every kind of person. We've got full-time people, part-time people, interns, community members, people who are doing it for the IQ points they get, people who are doing it for the resume, people who are doing it for pride, people who are getting equity in the company. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is where it's more heading towards. I think a site like Everpedia could eventually be a way bigger challenge to the New York Times than Vox or BuzzFeed.
Okay, great. So now I just have a couple of quick fire questions. And so how it works is I'll just say a couple of words or a phrase, and I just want the first thing that comes to your mind. Sound good? Okay,
Yeah.
so
Afraid I'm just gonna be like sex.
so so when I say culture, you think
Technology.
Hmm.
I don't know why I said that. That was literally the first thing that came to my head.
okay. When I say branding, you think
Marketing.
brands of the past are
Campbell's soup.
brands today are
Everpedia.
all brands need to
Make their wiki.
cool. Mahbod, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, you're the man. Thanks for reaching. And we didn't even mention Whale, by the way. So everyone knows,
Yeah.
Jordan and I connected on Whale, which is a really cool Q&A platform.
Yeah, it is cool. It's awesome. There's so many interesting people on there.
Yeah. No, now that we did this, I'm gonna go ask you some Whale questions. I'm gonna try to come dumpers.
Yeah. Who's your favorite person on Whale?
Ranadu. Yeah. I went to college with him, but I didn't know him in college. But he was a famous rapper for 13 years. From age 13 to age 26, he was a famous rapper in Sri Lanka, and then he stopped rapping to work for Google.
That's awesome, man.
So yeah, he's kind of like, ever since I got into Whale, he's like turning into my idol. He's just the coolest guy.